point where we realized that the parking enforcement system that the parking officer currently uses is at sort of the end of its life. The handheld equipment itself is kind of
out of chalk.
What's that? Yeah.
I was about to say, what kind of high-tech system do we have?
Very high tech. So yeah, there's like a software system for the
Chalk's not high-tech, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
system that runs
Very,
accounting is.
very low tech. But the software itself is kind of failing, and also, you know, there's been, was it a Supreme Court ruling about unlawful search and the chalking of tires? And
Right.
so anyway, you know, everybody's kind of at a point where we need to start
Does not
looking-
apply to this area.
Right, doesn't apply to this area, but we still need to start preparing for, you know, the future. And while we were kind of looking at, you know, the parking software and how we wanted to move forward with that, it just happened that Bar Harbor was doing the year-end review of their paid parking program. And that's really caught everyone's attention, largely because in the first year of the implementation of this program, it brought in $1.7 million worth of revenue. So that was kind of something that really has made a lot of municipalities, especially those with a large influx of seasonal visitors, really take notice of. So we thought that it would be prudent of us to, you know, find out a little bit more about Bar Harbor's program. So myself, Randy Gagney, the police chief, and Dave St. Laurent, our public works director, took a trip to Bar Harbor in December to speak with their town manager, finance director, and police chief to just find a little bit more out about the program and, you know, sort of its development, its implementation, and how it's been received by the community. So I prepared a memo kind of going over a lot of, you know, the background to the program, you know, sort of the outcome of it, and, you know, how we might want to consider proceeding if it's something the select board is interested in. So I guess, you know, by way of background, Bar Harbor was, you know, very similar scenario to Camden. I think, you know, that's not a surprise to anyone. Huge influx of summer visitors to the area. They've really struggled with the parking situation there for many, many years. They've had all kinds of task force and groups looking at how do we solve the parking problem. You know, a lot of looking into building parking garages and other kind of schemes to try and increase the parking supply. But I think the more that they looked into it, the more that they've thought, well, it's not really a matter of the amount of parking available, it's how that parking is utilized. And it's a lot of the kind of shuffling behavior that we see here where, you know, you've got like a 1 or 2 hour limit or whatever the limit is, and, you know, people who are in the downtown all day kind of shuffling between spots. So spots never really truly turn over. And that seemed to be the behavior that they were noticing the most and the one that they wanted to address. And, you know, they worked with a consultant and determined that the best way to do this was through the introduction of a paid parking program. And, you know, sort of a lot of it was focused on developing a policy around how that would work. So trying to make sure that, you know, residents and employees in the downtown were taken care of. And, you know, the residents, I think the policy was that they have a free parking permit. They can park outside of the downtown core for free. They can park at a reduced rate in the in-town areas. There's a few key areas like near the post office or other places where there are 15-minute spots where they can come and park for free, kind of like we have here. So they preserved those spaces. For downtown employees, there was a $30 a year parking permit, and it's kind of the same idea as what, you know, what is offered to the residents. What they found after a year of having this system in place was that a lot of there were, you know, of course, a lot of concern about what this was going to do, the impact it would have on businesses. So they tracked sales and, you know, restaurant sales, retail sales before and after the system was put in place. They found overall there was a 4% increase in sales at restaurants and retail. Like I've said in the memo, that's not to suggest that the implementation of a paid parking system increased sales, but it does suggest that it certainly did not hurt them. By all accounts, a lot of the businesses and residents are happy with the system because now they can come into town and find a spot in the downtown to park in quickly and do their business and leave. Whereas before, everybody was sort of driving around looking for spaces. So a lot of, positive reviews of, how the program has changed sort of behaviors around parking. And also, everybody is thrilled about the revenue. There's really specific statutory requirements on how that revenue can be spent. It can pay for the program itself. It can pay for improvements in the roadway, so a lot of it offsets the cost of their highway department and major capital projects in terms of, road improvements. So that's kind of just, broad. There's a lot more to it. There was a lot of work that was done to get it to a point where, it went to town meeting and was approved. There was a consultant that helped them work on it because the technology has been a big part of, making the system work, having something that's very user-friendly and accessible and makes it very, very easy for the users to interface with and be able to pay. I think one of the big lessons learned was the impact on the finance department was quite significant because of the administration of the permitting system as well as the collection of money and accounting. So I think that was good for us to know going into it because it was an unanticipated impact with Bar Harbor.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Number one, are the monies that brought in, are they allowed to pay for a finance person to run the system or just work on roads?
No, they can cover the cost of the program itself, so something like that.
How expensive was the program?
I do remember how much they said it was.
Infrastructure and everything, hardware, it was around 600,000, I think, was where they were at to get going.
And last question, can it work on any of the roads in Camden or just the roads where the meters are?
So they've got kind of a system of both meters and kiosks.
Right.
So yeah, it could go wherever
But it could,
the town chooses to put them.
but it doesn't have to be where the kiosks and the meters are. It can be any road in Camden.
If you choose for it to be, yeah.
Your system's very flexible. You can, if you saw the map but Bar Harbor was quite extensive. I was impressed.
Yes.
They really spread it out to they have a little bit more spread area than we do physically, but they classified it with the red, yellow, green, and all those meters versus blah, blah, blah versus blah, blah, blah. It was really, and it looks like they did about 4 revisions to their program in about a year and a half because they were learning on the fly, which is very typical in these situations. It changed something someplace, and I'm sure it was changing the zone of what street was in what category.
And the role of the parking enforcement officers was really changed as well. So not as much, very limited enforcement, particularly in the first year of the program, hardly any ticketing. The focus was mostly on them educating the public about the system and how to use the system and troubleshooting and, that kind of.
One other question for Randy and Dave. Would this allow you to develop a system that may help people with nighttime parking, overnight parking, and things like that?
Well, the monitoring of the traffic, the parking, I think went from, it was either 9 to 8 or 8 to 9. So after that, we would have to schedule people to be available 7 days a week to cover that, but they only ticket 6 months out of the year. So in the wintertime, there's no enforcement except for major violations, crosswalks, fire hydrants, things like that.
Fire hydrants.
Stuff they enforce anyway.
What's that?
Stuff that they would enforce anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. As far as overnight parking, we're always going to have to deal with, being able to have a day.
If that system allowed you to track cars that, residents' cars that had, permits or something. Just curious about it. It's still the same problem. If it snows, you got to.
It's true.
I'm just curious.
Our current system, what we do is when a parking ban goes into effect, we take the handheld out and we issue warnings for the first couple of weeks just to get people back into using it. Well, once the warning goes in there, we can track if that vehicle has been warned before for overnight parking. Similar to that, there's all kinds of different things. I can say that Jim Willis, the police chief down in Bar Harbor, he and I are the only two police chiefs right now in the state that do dual roles. He does Bar Harbor and Mount Desert.
Oh.
And Jim is top-notch. He's a great police chief, real professional. And when I took over the dual role of Camden and Rockport, he was instrumental in helping me get things going because he had gone through the pains of this. And I think if this was something that we went after to look at doing here in Camden, they've been very willing to help us get this going. So I think a lot of the pains of what we would go through when we first started, we could probably, they've already been through that, we could address them real quick. So,
I'm sorry, Dave.
Something that's interesting is that they remove the meters in the wintertime.
Oh,
They completely remove the heads
Oh.
and they store them because they have a GPS unit on them. And then they all have to be put back in the same place of where they came out from. So that was another interesting thing. So they're not there in the wintertime.
the
Is
kiosk.
that what we would be proposing for
Yeah, for
removing
the,
them in the winter?
yes, the meter spaces, not
Metered
the
spaces,
kiosks.
the kiosks
They
would stay.
The
Yeah.
kiosk you can't remove.
Right now, we still ticket, we've gone back and forth, but right now, we still ticket in the winter.
we do.
Bar Harbor does not.
They do not.
Would you change?
I'd be happy to do whatever the board would like.
There you
If you want,
Catch that ball.
enforcement, by ordinance, we'd have to make changes to the ordinance. By ordinance, we ticket year-round right now.
What would you recommend? You're the expert.
Instead of me giving you the answer to that, I think that's a question that needs to be answered by the business group, or take everybody into consideration, because it affects their business if
Yep.
vehicles are parked there all day long.
Yep.
I've been through this many times where I was told at one point that we weren't going to ticket, and then a few years later, I was brought back in and asked why we stopped ticketing. And I brought the email back up and explained why we had stopped that. So it goes back and forth. If you have winters that some merchants don't want it to look like a ghost town, and some still want the turnover. But businesses are always evolving down there, and thoughts of,
Yeah.
We are fortunate that we are a little busier in the winter than Bar Harbor is.
Yeah.
Right, I
It is a big
don't-
difference.
Allison?
I mean, I do think we should be careful about comparing ourselves too much to Bar Harbor,
Yeah.
considering we spend so much time trying to not become Bar Harbor. I worry about I always have the perception that the year-round population in Bar Harbor is much smaller than Camden. I think, Audrey, you had said maybe that was not correct.
No, we're about the same.
But what's
But when
that?
you go to Bar Harbor in the winter,
It
there's
feels-
nothing there.
Yeah.
So it's not like they have,
Now,
well, it's just spread, they don't have that active year-round downtown.
More businesses are
Like
seasonal.
we have.
It's true.
And so I wonder, it seems like maybe they don't have residents that are using the downtown in the same way that we're using it. And so
It's true.
it's less, there are less people maybe to upset in Bar Harbor in terms of year-round residents, and less of an impact. If you say, okay, well, the year-round residents, they get these stickers, or they get to park for free here and there, it seems like the demand for that in Camden would be a lot bigger. And so maybe
I mean, during like the off-season.
during any time. We still have a lot more Camden residents, I think, using our downtown, both in the summer and the winter. So the amount of those, like the number of those parking spots that are available would everybody pay the same amount for like a parking spot on Main Street, for example, for 2 hours?
So yeah, the idea would
Or
be
would the
that.
resident status help you?
So the residents would get the free permit to park in the peripheral areas.
Only in the peripheral areas.
But when it comes to the paid spaces, they get a reduced rate from visitors. So if they wanted to come in and park right in downtown, they could do so, but they'd still have to pay at a reduced rate.
What are some sample costs? Can you give me an idea of what?
Oh, gosh.
$2 an hour, right?
Yeah.
It's the
I think it
normal.
was $2 an hour in
That's
one
what-
area and then $1.50 an hour for another area that's near.
parking lots were
So say
$1.50
like
an hour.
right up on Main Street, the space is right on Main Street, maybe that's a $2 an hour, and then like
or $2 for 2 hours, maybe. So it was.
Then a resident might be able to pay $1.
Right, that's
some half.
the idea.
I think most people would prefer the opportunity to pay $1 to be able to park than to not be able to find a parking
To
spot.
find a place.
Right, and that's what they found.
Like, I'd much rather dig around in my seat cushions and,
Drive around in circles for
Or
half an
use your
hour.
phone, because a lot
Yeah,
of it
you
is
can use your
paid for by
phone for an
the-
app to
to a credit card and just pay
Yes.
later.
there you go. And the system that historically, these systems, especially the kiosk systems, have had electronic problems.
Yes.
Has Bar Harbor experienced those?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Have they solved the problems?
Well, that was the thing, a lot of the parking enforcement officers' time was spent
I see.
on that sort of
I see.
troubleshooting.
Getting through that.
It is.
Is there, Randy, using your institutional knowledge,
You're going out there.
You just got set up.
can you remember the last time if we really have had an earnest conversation about this in Camden? How long ago?
Oh,
that
I can
was?
tell you.
Yeah.
Audra's got all the notes.
There's all kinds of files in the town office.
2002,
Okay.
yeah.
18
And
years.
was there, I'm just curious, the reason I asked, I'm curious if there was any big roadblocks that came up that were like the definitive sort of, this is not going to work
I
for
think it was the
Part.
whole, this is going to ruin,
concept.
this is going to ruin the businesses, no one's going to want to pay to park,
Right.
no one's going to stop here and shop, you know, people
Yeah.
aren't going to come to Camden anymore.
It was the downtown businesses.
Yeah,
Which
and
is why I really I cringe a little bit when I hear Randy say, well, we just have to ask the downtown businesses, because the history of that is that it feels like they've had
Sure.
more of a voice than
Sure.
really anybody, and their instincts maybe aren't always 100% right.
Right, and we never had any other municipality to point to other than like a Portland or a Bangor to say, well, the reality is that it's not going to
It's not comparable.
hurt your business.
In Bar Harbor, did they have, when the kiosks, you said the meters are taken away, the kiosks, are they just covered in the winter?
Nope, they just sit out there.
They just sit there, but there's no requirement to,
They're inactive, yeah.
But we would need to use them, probably.
Not in the wintertime.
But why, then we would be abandoning, there would be consequences, right, even just right now, to completely abandoning ticketing. It's not, our downtown is by no means empty. It's already hard to find a spot
You know,
to
you
park, even in the winter
develop a
sometimes.
policy where maybe the area shrinks a little bit, you know?
I think you could do
Like it contracts
Main
in
and
the
Elm
winter?
Street. There's
That's
hourly
the key.
parking during the wintertime.
yeah.
We have issues right here, maybe
What I
if
saw with Bar
town employees
Harbor's
wouldn't park there.
diagrams was the flexibility of the system to make road by road, literally road by road changes, or street by street changes. That's an advantage, because you're going to learn pretty quickly after 6 months of the first 6 months that this isn't working too well over here. And I'm sure that's why they had the long list of select board meetings. They had to change modifications to the system. And I'm sure it was to the maps.
And also, that's why they got a consultant, because
Yeah.
having somebody who
Yeah.
can help design it is
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah.
The ones that get taken in the, I haven't seen a picture, the ones that get taken away in the winter, where, are they at every, like the traditional kind that
Yeah.
are at every spot?
Head just comes
Yeah,
off
and the
the
ones
pole.
that kind of are the kiosks that serve a number of spots or a whole parking lot, they stay there.
Or a whole street.
So how much of the revenue in Bar Harbor came from the kiosk, systems versus the?
Meter?
How dependent is it on the little traditional meters?
Fairly, well, so this is another thing that they found, because I think
At every parking spot, we would put one?
at every on-street parking spot,
Can I ask a question?
except for, like, in the downtown area, sorry, Mark, like, it could be on, like, Main Street or Bayview or
Chestnut.
Washington, or, all this sort of downtown.
And they're bolted to the sidewalk or something, or?
Yeah, they like stick in there's like a base for them that they stick in, and then you can remove them.
It just concerns me that we wouldn't be able to have the cost savings of not having our officer walking around, because if we have to take away part of the system in the winter, then we're going to lose all the revenue from that, and I don't think we can do what Bar Harbor does and just have it be a free-for-all in the winter, because we do have a lot going on.
We're going to be rewriting a lot of ordinance to do this.
Yeah, you are. You
That's
are.
what we can take into
And some towns
consideration.
have just kept the system and changed the rates for the winter.
Right.
Well, I always hear that we can't have things in the winter because of plowing and the snow, but we can't even have trash cans most of the time. So is it an option to leave the meter, is it?
Yes, it's an option.
Let me ask a question. Bar Harbor's using one system. I travel, maybe Bob and I travel more than anyone else here, but in New York, in Los Angeles, in Boston, they don't have
Right.
meters anymore. They have a kiosk, and you buy a sticker for your car for the time that.
For your windshield.
Right, like at the end of the street
You know,
even.
The meters are going away everywhere else. It's an old system. You know, if we just had kiosks, it would be, you know.
I mean, this is really into the weeds.
It really is. It
It's not
really
for me.
is.
I mean, I don't think
Well, it
it's-
is, because we could, for example, if the system were to, what we're really talking about, do we want to investigate further the system for use in Camden? We could perhaps have a system that has absolutely no meters or very limited meters. That's kind of the consultant kind of, they'll recommend that kind of thing, because the meters can be troublesome, I would agree with that. But you can go, like Portland has too, to 100%, pretty much
I mean, I
100%.
don't think it's into the
Do
weeds
you
in
want to
terms
hear
of what
what
we're
the
trying to
breakdown,
understand.
do you want to hear what the breakdown is in
And
Bar
also
Harbor,
just how
just as an
flexible is it?
example?
Just-
So they've got about 900 spaces, 316 are the single space meter on street. You've got a traditional type parking meter, it's a smart meter, but anyway, it's per each space. 174 multi-space kiosks that are for specifically on-street parking, and then 403 multi-space kiosk controlled spaces.
Like lots.
Yep, yep. That's the breakdown of spaces.
But back to Mark's comment, I guess I'm not trying to get into the weeds, but I do want to get a sense of how flexible, what the level of flexibility you're envisioning is. So the sort of pitch from town staff or whatever, do you want to do this? In order for me to be able to answer, should we move forward? It's helpful for me to know which things are negotiable and which things aren't negotiable. And it's either we copy Bar Harbor like they did it, or we're not doing this because we already researched this model.
I think that would be crazy because,
True, I do too.
I mean, that's just a broad general, this is the concept, but of course, we're not Bar Harbor. We're a different community, so we're going to need to adjust.
Yes.
And I guess another example, Rockland's looking at this as well. And they're,
Davis's thing in the free
yeah,
press.
I just met with him and just said, hey,
Right.
you know, it looks like we're.
Yeah, I think Bar Harbor is a model. It's not our model. I think we could be, from everything that we could easily be 100% kiosk to 100% meters and everything in between. It's really a decision has to be
I'd
made.
recommend.
100 spaces that we could,
Do we?
Yes, we've got probably
That people would
more,
hate.
we've got more parking than Bar Harbor, particularly in our core area. They had to go all the way into the
Residential.
neighborhoods to find parking, and we wouldn't need to, we've got more parking in our downtown than they do. If you look at our surface
what do you
lots.
consider the downtown to be?
I consider the Knowlton and Knox Street, or Knox Mill to be downtown.
One of the things that we've said to residents is those are going to be free, those would be free for the peripheral, would that be considered periphery parking, free for residents?
And this is why, like, a lot of the questions you're asking, I really would say that if you want to move forward with this,
That's what you have to
we need a
evaluate.
consultant to help us design a program, because
I'm trying to get a general sense of the numbers and how far, it doesn't, that amount of revenue sounds unattainable to me, but I haven't ever looked at this carefully. So I'm trying to get a sense of how much we actually have to charge in order for it to be, like, this is going to be a huge amount of talking, basically.
Yes.
They were 2 years.
And you look at the way any of us spends our day, and what we can work on and what's important. And I just want to, in theory, I'm very much in favor of this. I think free parking is bad for towns. I think it incentivizes automobiles. I think there's really, the only fair way to distribute a scarce resource is some sort of system, and the system of drive around until you find a spot and move things a bunch of times doesn't work. So I'm very much in favor of it, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that every time the town takes something on, it takes a lot of our
does.
time. It's going to be a lot of emails, it's going to be a lot of select board meeting time, it's going to be a lot of staff time, it's going to be a lot of confused residents, and,
Yep.
Oh, no doubt.
just how, I just,
Yeah, I agree with that. You're right. It does, and that's the question really in my mind. How many spaces, but all this stuff has to be analyzed, and it's time. It takes time. And by the way, the consultant will consume some money and some time also. But in my mind, like you, Allison, I agree. I think it's a great, it's the wave of the future. Not anybody says every town, city, maybe not as much in Maine, but they're going down this road because there is a revenue source here. At the end of the day, they've all seen there is a revenue source. And more importantly, it does do a better job of regulating limited parking, which every place has a problem with, unless you're going to build a mega parking garage someplace. But even there, they've done the same thing there. So to me, yeah, I'd be willing to accept that load. I think it's important. Parking is a problem. It continues to be a problem in this town. We're not going to increase it real quickly, although I see that need too. Parking multi-level garage, that's part of the analysis. But I think we need to take it downstream and see, at least take it to a point where, you don't have to take it all the way to the end with somebody. We can get to a point where you say, yeah, this is where we want to go. And you know what? That's a deal breaker. That can happen too. That can happen real quickly for a town like Camden. The advantage of it is it's so flexible in what you can do with kiosks, meters, nothing. You have those options. And you also have multi-seasonal options with those systems also in terms of what you charge if you want to charge in the winter.
If I remember, the reason they put the meters up was for the ability to have coin operated.
Yes.
And you can't coin operate out of the kiosk, I don't
Cannot.
believe. So
Credit card.
that was part of, one of the tasks was they had to go and empty the meters every day.
Jeez.
But
Yeah.
you get, the program shows you how much is in each meter.
Yep.
So you know which ones, now, maybe some don't need to be emptied every day. All the coins go into a sealed vault.
Right.
You don't touch the money.
Right.
You take the vault out, you place it on another
Right.
vault, the money drops into that vault. So getting into partnership with your local bank to get a coin machine was one of the things they did. But I think that was one of the pushes for keeping the meters in the downtown areas was the ability to
And
use
I
coin.
know from experience that overseas, especially in Europe, this is in small towns, it's the norm. And some do have the ability to put in euro, but most are credit card. That's the only variation I've seen.
It's about 80%
80% of credit card. It depends on the size of the town, but even the smallest towns of a couple of thousand people, permanent population, they've done this too because they're tourist areas and certain times of the year they want to be able to control that, and most residents have liked it. Yes.
Yes, so for me, I am definitely in favor of seeing us explore this more. I think in this meeting, I'm looking at this as whether or not we're conceptually in favor of putting more time into exploring this. My interpretation is that, we can sort of do anything that we want within the limits of the hardware and the software of the parking program. And, we can set the fees, we can create the areas as broad or as narrow as we want them to be. So looking at it conceptually, knowing that needs to be worked out, I think it could be really exciting, and it will certainly make people nervous because it's a big change from what people in downtown Camden have been used to since forever. That being said, I think there could be, if people keep an open mind about what might be possible with this system, we could actually see some real benefit, I think, if we're willing to see it down the line far enough to understand the details of what can the system do to increase parking turnover, to encourage more people that live in the Village District to walk downtown instead of driving downtown. The revenue factor, it's not my primary interest here, but it can't be ignored either when we're in a time where we've heard from quite a few people, I think, in the last year or two about, their tax bills going up. If there's a way to increase revenue in our budget based on something that's a use, is really smart. Any way that we can increase revenue in a way like that, that's not overburdensome to people, I think needs to be explored. And I've lived in communities before where I've had paid parking, and, living in Los Angeles, Mark can tell you, it, can be very frustrating and totally different. And, it's free parking has its benefits, and that, you can just go down and not have to worry about taking your credit card out and running to a store. But if there's no spaces available, that doesn't really serve its purpose either. So I'm definitely in favor of I think a working group is a smart idea. I realize that, we talk about hating throwing things to committee all the time, but I think this is such a specific item that has a lot of details that need to be explored. That's the way to go. I took some time last night there's quite a bit of work and research that Bar Harbor has done in the documents that Audra provided us with. And I think that Chief Gagné is right that we kind of have an opportunity if we do continue moving forward with at least considering it, that Bar Harbor has kind of knocked the door down for us already and figured out what some of the hardships that we might face will be. So I think that that's a benefit to us, and that we're not the first person through the door. We're kind of, we can kind of avoid some of the pitfalls that they may have seen. So, I'm hopeful that it might be a real benefit, and there might be some opportunities for us. Yeah.
Oh, of course, Mark, sorry.
I'm totally willing to have a workshop and take it to the public to vote to see what they want, but I'm totally against it. And the reason I'm against it is, one, it changes the fabric of the town, but two, I guess it's because of the traveling, because of the parking situations running across the country. Parking has become about money. And the greed that I see ramping up, the more expensive parking gets every time you go someplace where people say, hey, I can make more money in this. It's something that's happened in this country that I think is hurting the country. And I come down here because in the 4 years I've been on the board, and before the meetings, I'm down here very often 2-3 times a day, winter, summer, spring, fall. I never have a problem finding a parking space. I may have to walk a little bit, but I never have a problem. I've never had a problem finding a parking space when I need to come down. I come at different times of day, different times of year when it's crowded and packed. Those are my sort of, background, problems with it. I'm interested to see what we do. I would be totally against having meters. I think that's going back a little bit. I think kiosks would be cleaner and easier to manage than having all the individual meters you have to take out. So I'm willing to see where it goes, but I'm basically highly against it. Even though, granted, it's solved some problems and brings into revenue, but I think it's, once you open Pandora's box, it's open and there's no going back. That's how I feel about it.
Question that I guess I sort of assume, but does Bar Harbor administrate the whole thing themselves, or is there a private entity involved at some point?
No, they do
Okay.
all the administration.
The systems are like Portland's the same way, I know. Allison?
I mean, I guess also I see that we need a lot of ways to be financing non-carbon intensive forms of transportation. And if you try to ride a bike downtown, you encounter any number of obstacles, potholes, telephone poles, all kinds of things. I don't know what's going on down here. What's the wire that's just like,
Where?
that's I guess a question for another day, but at the Mechanic Street intersection,
Oh, I didn't see it.
it's like what wire with cones around it for really kind of unnerving. But
It's been called in.
I figured to just
Nice if they're a little more responsive.
it's just like, is that a live? I assume not a live wire or anything.
No wires safe to touch.
It is?
Ever.
Oh, right. Okay. No, it's not safe to touch.
No.
But all right. Well, geez, is it safe to step in the puddle that the wire is resting in? I'm not going to. But it's in a crosswalk. Anyway, we have a lot of issues, and we need some way to finance it. And if we're we can't continue to make things convenient all the time for cars. We're going to need bike you can't even find a place to put if you want to ride your bike to a select board meeting, where are you going to put the bike? All of that costs money to create that kind of infrastructure, and what better way than taxing parking in some format? Still, I know this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but I do feel the town is really overwhelmed in terms of, or stretched thin in terms of all the different things that are being taken on. We have a select board right now that we all sort of have a strong urge to take lots of things on, and that has saddled staff with many things, and then they have things of their own, and it feels like we already have a little trouble keeping up with all the committees. And so I would be hesitant to just start this off by forming another committee or a work group. Is that the only way to move forward? Is there going to be a staff? Anytime you have a committee, then you have a staff liaison and then a select board liaison maybe. And what's the model for moving forward without it taking a massive amount of staff time and maybe even select board time to do some more research?
I'm really pushing engagement of a consultant if you want to.
I would agree.
Okay, so the consultant could happen with a work group or without a work group, or starting without, and
Whatever you.
You're right, Allison. I think there's this, in my mind, a subtle difference between, because you make good points, about a modest-sized work group working with a consultant is much different than our classic approach of, I'm exaggerating, make a point here a little bit, but a number of citizens we grabbed to put on a 7 or 9 person committee, and then it kind of then breeds a life of its own, because the other thing that happens to me is they meet probably on a monthly basis, and
it's very hard to keep up with for us.
Yeah, I'm just not poo-pooing that, but I think in this instance, if you have a consultant, and we've seen this already, by the way, in my opinion, where we have some high energy, great people working on committees, but then we bring on a specialty consultant, and all of a sudden the whole subject area takes off. Mark?
Yeah, I could support a consultant, definitely spending from select board contingency to do it, maybe even, but not just ping-ponged between all of our different staff that are already really busy. I mean, I understand it's going to take some staff time no matter what, but.
And I think that's a great point, because totally acknowledge that there are a lot of projects we're all working on. I'm going to be putting out an update of all of our just infrastructure projects tomorrow, and there's 21 on that list. So we got a lot going. So I appreciate that perspective, because it's very.
I think a consultant is important because you're bringing in expertise, and this is a complex situation, and expertise is interesting. We can get a group of people, but just getting them up to speed and hoping that they're, the right people to make the decision. I'd like to see, start with the advantage of expertise and somebody that knows what they're talking about, so that, we have a better reference point to start.
I like that.
I totally agree with you. So I think what we're hearing is moving forward with the activity focused on bringing in a consultant on some dollars to spend, and what work group we pile around that. That's a decision to be made in the future. It should be limited in size, and hopefully individuals who have some skin in the game. Chief?
And maybe even, a meeting the style of the DOT pedestrian forum. I really liked that, because it brought in a lot of people that don't have the time to commit to all, committee meetings every month at 7 o'clock during dinner time, but
Right. No, I agree.
it's a good way to collect
I
more
agree.
general input.
So I guess the next step probably sounds like we're talking about is getting some proposal, RFP for a consultant for some, I don't know what phase it would be called, but some initial phase of work here, and let them come back with a scope of work which we could review.
Yes. And I'll reach out to
Sound reasonable?
specialized. So.
It is.
Put this
it
on the
is.
next select board agenda too, so we can actually we
sure.
can actually
Yeah,
vote
sure. Sure.
people could
Sure.
have a chance to say something. And Jenna's not here. I know she probably has thoughts and has thought about this a lot.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks for running this down, guys.
Yeah, this is good. I
Yeah,
enjoyed the memo,
yeah.
and
Yeah, it was very, very detailed, much more than I expected. Especially Bar Harbor's program, I really like the flexibility of it, because you can plug and play.
And we're fortunate, there are a lot of people who've done a lot of work.
There is.
in Camden
There
over
is.
the years on
There is.
parking, so it's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if we engage, or hopefully when we engage a consultant, there's going to be a lot of information that we can just give to them, and so that's
A
wonderful
starting
that we
point,
have
a
that.
starting point, yeah, I would
Great
agree.
starting point.
It's 18 years old, but it's a starting point.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's pretty relevant still.
All relevant. And the town hasn't physically changed a hell of a
And
lot.
so they
18
included
years.
similar things
That
in
was
the 80s too,
discussions
right?
Graduating high school and ready to go on to the professional.
That's correct, that's correct. Okay, cool. All right, any other comments, questions? Jody, you have anything, or any comments?
No, I'm looking forward to seeing how this all pans out as far as administrative and
Great, great. Jeremy?
Yeah, it's going to be the
Mr.
most
David.
work for
Okay.
you, probably.
It really is, that's
Okay.
why I'm getting Jody
We're
involved
done.
from the beginning,
I'm excited for the opportunity to learn more.
and do a lot more work.
I love crunching numbers.
Are you on that list? I see you and I have